What does reparations mean?
Reparations is so important, not just for Black folks, but for the entire world and U.S. economy. We're past racism behind who can't drink at what fountain, or who can't eat here, or who can't get this job. Now we're just talking about economic or systemic racism. And that is a more nuanced conversation that doesn't require emotions. It requires strategic thought.
We're talking about the American economy and the supply chain.
We saw that chattel slavery was a lifeline to this country, creating for us to be an economic superpower. I think we need actually compensation based on our own unique perspective. And until we get compensation uniquely for us and individually for us, we won't be truly remunerated or reparated.
Welcome to the Maleena Lawrence Show. I'm your host, Maleena Lawrence. We have an in-studio guest, brother Sed Brass. And guess what? He's a social activist, but he got a unique take on reparations. And that is our topic today. Welcome to the studio and to the set of the Maleena Lawrence Show. This is very, very special, Sed.
Yes,
because
yes.
This not only is a topic dear to my heart and out on the streets, y'all need to think about this for real. You really need to think about it from the hood to the hills. What does reparations mean?
Right.
And so I'd like to welcome you to the show. Welcome back, all our fans, all our guests, all our friends, our early believers of the Maleena Lawrence Show. This is meant to really discuss and build awareness around public policy and the issues that impact public policy from a generational perspective. And I know your perspective, Sed, is very unique when it comes to reparations.
Yes, very much so.
We're in California. California is the first state to actually build a statewide task force. Governor Gavin Newsom did this. And it's supported by task force members and community members that are very interested on what would it be like if we receive reparations, if Blacks in America received reparations. But particularly speaking, we're focused on Californians. So you've been out here in the streets, in the community, in different rooms, moving and grooving and talking about why reparations is important, what's the debacle about it. But I'm interested in you sharing your take with us about reparations. You said it's the lifeline. He said, what he say? Said, reparations is the lifeline. But the lifeline of what?
Yeah, and it's funny that you phrased it that way. I think reparations is so important, not just for so-called Black folks here in America or Black folks in California, but for the entire world and the entire U.S. economy. I take it more from a political stance, a humanitarian stance, but not from an emotional stance. And I think that framework is a different spin on it versus always taking it from an emotional. We understand the impact that it had on us from a sociological stance for Black people here in America. But stepping away from that and just dealing with it from an economic stance is very important. I've likened it to terms of even reframing it as remunerations. It's a legal.
Wait, hold on. What?
Remunerations.
Tell us what that is.
Yeah, it's actually a legal term. It's a legal term that speaks to recompense from a labor standpoint. We saw that chattel slavery was basically the lifeline to this country and creating for us to be an economic superpower off of the backs of free labor. And I think that we see it in HR and we see it in a work labor force standpoint that people aren't paid equitably for work that they provided, but people have been able to enrich themselves based on that free labor. And so I think we have a lot of good statisticians that can go back and actually look at how slaves were traded, how there was labor divided based on this country being rich. And so if we can go back and look at just from a labor perspective, how this country was enriched. Now we're talking about blind trusts. We're talking about the government itself. We're talking about private industry. So there's a lot of things that we can actually go back and look at how this country just was enriched before we can take pennies on a dollar for actually being whipped and sold. But I think if we take it out of the emotional standpoint, which reparations, I believe, looks at it from what we call legally pain and suffering, and we look at it from a remuneration standpoint and just say unpaid labor and how we were actually working and didn't even get paid properly for the services that we provided.
But that's still happening today, right? Because when you look at equity, and actually equity is a major buzzword in the States right now. And so when I think of equity and people fighting for equity, and especially organizations in our community, be it from the boardroom to just everyday jobs when hiring men, women, equity based on gender, based on class, based on social economic locations. We think about equity, but do you think equity, for the lack of better words, is also a buzzword being used to cover up or distract us from reparations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think equity in some ways allows for other people to be able to catch all. We never have anything that specifically speaks for us. We even look at DEI, which, the E is equity and DEI today, right? And we see how so many people can like catch that whole equity inclusion part, right? We definitely want to include, other ethnic groups into that. And I think that, again, if we're marginalized from our own unique perspective, then we need to be recompensed based on that unique perspective that we sit in, and don't allow other groups, although they might need recompense for what they have actually befall. But I think we need actually compensation based on our own unique perspective. And until we get compensation uniquely for us and individually for us, we won't be truly remunerated or reparated.
So let's think about this. Like, seriously, y'all, let's think about this. As a culture, Black people, we are emotionally in touch with our feelings and expressing them. And then when you look at the mental baggage that we have from, we can get so deep or just a little deep, surface deep, but from a cellular level, the things that are brought up when it comes to reparations. What's your perspective on how to compartmentalize the emotional, the mental? Because I'm asking this from a holistic approach perspective. Right. So how do we share with another brother or sister and then the world when it comes to, because emotion is twofold. You feel it, somebody else is catching it. So as Black people, we may get too emotional to really focus on the target, reparations and what that looks like. But on the flip side of that, the reciprocity, or someone who is saying, well, they don't even need reparations. Some people during policy and voting for a policy, some people vote for reparations. Some people voted against reparations. Right. So that's a feeling attached to that choice too. So what is your thoughts about, hey, compartmentalize how you feel right now, because we got to focus on what?
Correct. And that's why I always say we have to take and remove the emotions out of the argument, because we're now trying to sell it. And I work in sales, right? And so I think once you take the emotional component out of the sales pitch and you just take the logical and use and kind of go into critical analysis based on it. And also we're living in a selfish world. So people got to see how they benefit from it. Mm-hmm. So I think there's even an argument on how this cash injections through reparations will even help, the U.S. economy, and how everyone will be able to benefit it. Of course, we get into these kind of like conversations, even with our diaspora brother and sister. They feel some type of way, even though they share in Blackness with us. But reparations, they won't have a part of that.
Because race is a whole nother issue.
A whole nother
classification. And we might have to have a whole panel dialogue to break that down. Like, seriously, when you talk about race. But when you get back and dive into, I want you to finish answering that. Actually, go ahead and finish answering that, because I got.
No, so I think, this is another thing. There are a lot of reports. Citigroup just did a report about how even economic racism has contributed greatly to the U.S. debt. Mm-hmm. And so I think that even in this cash injection, and even in the Citigroup report, and I think Brookings also did a report on this, that even if we took away systemic racism, that can contribute $5 trillion into the debt over 5 years. And so even if we're looking at the U.S. economy, we talk about Joe Biden and the U.S. Oh, we're trying to get the debt down. We're trying to get the debt down. So take away how you feel about it. Take away if you have to feel some type of way about this, but this can even help the U.S. economy. We're talking about education. We're talking about jobs. We're talking about wages or wealth. And so as we get more wealth, transfer income, so does the actual country. So if you're really invested in the overall health and wealth of the U.S. economy, even reparation helps from that aspect too.
But is it a psychological trip? When you think about sales, and yes, I want reparations. I'm not playing from a cash perspective and a resource perspective. I'm for reparations, clear as day. However, when you think about people who are for or talk, even in conversation about, that if they paid is it a myth? This is the question, actually. Okay. Is it a myth that if all the Black people in America receive reparations, that America would be broke?
No.
Why?
We see this happening to every demographic today. We just saw Biden sign in policy $200 billion to Africa. No shade to Africa, but, we saw how much cash injection was put in place when we had this COVID pandemic. We can go through all type of public policy where we're seeing cash injections. We still have even so-called reparations on the books for Holocaust survivors. We have reparations still on the books to this day for people that survived World War I. So I think that it's just kind of this logical fallacy that we try to say that we can pay everybody else. We can pay every group. I mean, we had $100 million given to just white farmers. We talk about subsidies to this day. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that it's a fallacy when it talks about reparations. It's just something that is that for whatever reason, well, I have my own reasons why, but when we have to maintain the social class and the social hierarchy, we have to maintain one group above the other in order to create wealth and transfer wealth for one specific demographic and group. So it is a certain form of racism economically. We're past racism behind who can't drink at what fountain or who can't eat here or who can't get this job. Now we're just talking about economic or systemic racism. And that is a more nuanced conversation that doesn't require emotions. Yeah. It requires like statics or statistics and strategic thought.
So we're also a lot of people, especially you mentioned COVID, and I did definitely want to look at what COVID has the goodness of COVID, meaning how people have focused and concentrated on things. Sometimes we are moving too fast in life to focus on. And I think during this time, we really had time to sit and chill and say, this is what's important. From a policy perspective, it seems like we've been really focused on what's important for Black people because we did see how marginalized we were being treated or cared for during this time as a community when it comes to resources. And then even greater, the country itself was kind of in a back and forth debacle about how we're going to manage a freaking pandemic.
Correct.
So what triggered me one day was that, I actually got a call from a family member that was incarcerated and had caught COVID a couple of times.
Oh, wow.
And the treatment was delayed. But also it reminds me of when we talk about reparations and talk about incarceration and we're talking about the American economy and the supply chain. Like the picture I want to paint here and I'm attempting to paint is that reparations is actually in a lot of the different systemic fabrics
Correct.
of our nation. And within that, the fabric, the weaving of this fabric that we're all a part of and living in consistently, we're impacted. But where do you see the impact in the supply chain of how people can actually look at you contribute to this, whether it be behind bars or in a pandemic or just day-to-day working man, woman, teenager, college student that happens to be Black in America or whatever your racial classification may be? How do you see that our part being played, like how reparation actually contributes to all these different entities set up in this country?
That is interesting. And that goes down the whole systemic racism part, right? And again, I think it's not probably the best argument when we're arguing with others to try to convince them how they contribute to racism versus how they can benefit from eradicating racism. And so that's always been my argument, because that takes away their emotional trigger. It makes people become more defensive. Well, I'm not racist, and oh no, I didn't create these programs, and I'm not benefiting. So when you try to convince people from the framework of how they are a contributor to racism versus how they can benefit by eradicating it, I think is a better sales pitch and a better argument. And so I always try to frame it from that, especially when I'm in several conversations with people that aren't Black people, that descend from chattel slavery. And I think that I find success in reaching that, which is why I spoke earlier about how it can eradicate the U.S. debt and showing how this cash injection will do that and how you'll benefit from it. And when we look at the GDP, I think that we all are partakers of that. And so I try to play on those heartstrings versus, oh, you are racist. Now, it just depends on how radical the person is. And I try to measure it based on, I feel the person's heart and intentions are, and base the conversation around that. And that's something as Black folks we have to do. I know we aren't required to play to other people's emotions, but I think we have a certain innate skill set based on how we're able to be emotionally emote ourselves and be more centered, as you said earlier, and knowing how to really reconcile what our emotions are. So we have an innate gift and to be able to use that. And so I think we have to use that in these conversations.
And I think that part of that innate gift is wisdom. You know, being able to have discernment in conversations, like you said, to diffuse the emotions and be able to, as a people, as a culture, and as a country, to literally look at how public policy or controversial topics that have people to go really deep within to see their forefathers or, you know, or on the flip side, oppressors really restore, for the lack of better words, the reconciliation part of reparations. Because I understand, I understand that we have to put emotions to the side, but I think we're also facing a strong presence with this subject matter, this topic, this movement, if you will. And we're going to have to share and teach how, our community, how to deal with their emotional intelligence in order to get all people on board intelligently to handle this topic and to receive reparations. So, because, let's just call it, y'all. Some people's like, if you get reparations, just like people got a, the stimulus check?
Yeah, exactly.
The stimmy check. Right. I saw jokes online when people got their stimmy checks. It's like, how are we gonna deal with reparations? How are we gonna balance a budget with reparations? Yeah. And we getting excited over a stimulus checks.
Yeah. And I think that even baked inside and look, it's people way more intellectual than me that can kind of parse out how we disperse it and how we use the money. But I definitely think some type of educational awareness and some type of test on education and literacy is going to be kind of like contingent on receiving reparations, much like our driver's license. Hey, we got to take a test to even pass a driver's license exam. So I think that, Black folks shouldn't just get some kind of like stimulus check in the mail and be like run around. It has to be some type of financial responsibility that's kind of baked into it.
I'm with you on that. I'm definitely with you on that. We are running out of time, but I just want to bring it back to the beginning. So you said, reparations is the lifeline.
Yeah.
Talk about that and share with us what you mean by that and how it fuels you as a social justice advocate. I see, when I think about how your stance is, it's really human rights, in my mind, like how you take this position. Reparations is the lifeline of.
It's so many things that are the lifeline to quote unquote being Black. I think as a man first, being a protector, being a provider, being able to pass on legacy to your children. This is the lifeline of Black America. And so I even think that this kind of like economic kind of racism that we're going to is challenging just the very identity of who and what we are as men in society, as family, right? We even see nuclear family is under attack. Like the ability for a Black man to be able to come together with a black woman and create family. We even see patriarchy being attacked, right? Which is is the essence of basically passing down inheritance to your offspring. So these to me are the lifeline foundations and tenements to actually being Black in America, to just have the fundamental ability to not just exist, but to have the equity and to be able to get wealth and also transfer it down to your legacy and your namesake. And that's the lifeline to being a Black man. That's the lifeline to being a Black family. And it's to be able to just exist in society today. And I think that's a fair ask and a fair request, to just exist.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you to our guest in studio today, Sed Brass, discussing reparations and his take on it, the cost of reparations. We had some great takeaways today, Sed. Thank you so much on the Poly Day. I know. So grateful. And we're pushing this conversation on reparations. We're challenging you. We're challenging America to have an open dialogue, have some distinct choices, make some moves. I'm your host, Maleena Lawrence. Thank you for joining us on the Maleena Lawrence Show with our in-studio guest once again, Sed Brass. Thank you.
Thank you.